Hello, everybody, and welcome to another amazing phoenixNAP Veeam webinar. Today, we are going to talk about securing your Office 365 data. My name is William Bell, Executive Vice President of Products at phoenixNAP, and as always, I have my compatriot, Michael Deemer, Inside Systems Engineer from Veeam. Welcome, Michael.
Well, thank you. Thanks for having me, William.
Great. So there's a ton of content today. So we're gonna be moving pretty fast. If there are any questions, just toss them in the questions box down at the bottom in the GoToWebinar console, and we will absolutely get to them at the end. So let's jump right into it. So we're gonna start the day with a quick poll question, just so that I can get a little bit better understanding of where everybody's at in their journey around how they're working. Are you sitting at home right now? Are you in the office? Like, what's that looking like for you? Oh, wow. Okay, well, I'm interested in this. This is gonna be a good one. All right. Cool. Well, I mean, it's certainly what I expected to some extent. Today's world, it's amazing how fast everybody kind of just left, but it's about 40% hybrid, 40% remote work, and then 25% from the office. That's not too bad. I think that the idea of what we're talking about today around kind of like modern SaaS applications, specifically 365 today, is becoming a bigger topic now that everyone's kind of working from home. The acceleration of Office 365 adoption post-pandemic is just absolutely insane. So, fully expect that most of you guys are consuming something like O365. And so none of these statistics that I'm showing here should be shocking to you, right? But, you're looking at over 1 million clients of the Office 365 suite from Microsoft today. That is, I think it translates over to like 345 million paid Office users, which is just a crazy number. But I think the key to these numbers are not just to splash them on the screen, but just to show everybody, the amount of data in your organization that is residing in here times millions, right? You have to think it's certainly an attack vector. It's certainly, Microsoft's doing everything they can. It's certainly a place that we know from talking to our customers and having our own implementation of this internally ourselves is constantly under attack, right? And so you have to find ways to protect yourself. And that's really what we're going to work through today as we kind of cover what Veeam's doing, what PNAP's doing, to hopefully make this job easier for you and your organization. And so when we look at like, not just SaaS, but like if you look at what or why you should adopt any type of data protection scheme, hopefully today you're doing something. Most of our customers we talk to, they're doing something typically infrastructure oriented, where they're like really heavily focused on the infrastructure and the applications behind their firewalls essentially. But stuff like SaaS applications tends to kind of just fall by the wayside in terms of security and data protection. They either assume the vendor's doing it for them, which we're going to talk a little bit about, or they just haven't given it a thought, right? A little laissez-faire attitude of sorts around protecting their SaaS application data. But ultimately, like many of these themes that are shown here, they apply to Office 365 as well, right? And specifically like administrator configuration errors, administrator malfeasance, accidental deletion. These things they just happen to SaaS applications too. I think that it's fairly rare that that Office 365 is offline for any extended period of time, but it may happen one day, right? It definitely goes down, and the question, I guess, on a lot of people's minds are like, if it's down, like, what does the productivity of their organization look like anyway? And are there ways to get themselves back up and rolling inside of that window that makes sense. And I would be lying to say that like trying to bring all your data back from your backup onto your on-prem version of Exchange and then extended Office 365 outage, while possible, certainly we're talking a bit about the possibility, while possible, is not an avenue that a lot of people would approach just because of the time to do it. But I think it's going to lend to the power and the flexibility, specifically the technology that Veeam has laid out for you with their Veeam backup for Office 365. And so a lot of this kind of rolls into the impact of these types of outages, specifically in this case talking about data breaches. But this is the reason that we're talking about data breaches specifically is this this Office 365 recycle bin is essentially 90 days, right? And so if you delete something, it's gone. And I think even that, and Mike's going to cover this in more detail. He's got better statistics than I have, but like I think even that is optional. I think it's only like 30 days or something like that, 30 or 60 as part of your normal account. A lot of times it takes a long time to realize that something's gone, especially if it's not an email that's you go back to look for an email that you had a year ago that you read and you just definitely need it. It could have been deleted, a year ago. It's not going to be in your recycle, right? And so there's a lot of reasons to look at data retention that exceeds that type of period. And certainly, backups of Office 365 data is one of those ways. And so we see a lot of misconceptions around like what Microsoft's doing for you. And a lot of this boils down to like, what is your responsibility? We're going to spend a couple slides talking about like what your responsibility as it specifically applies to Microsoft looks like. But I think it definitely starts with this idea that, there's just no reason to create backups, right? Microsoft's replicating my data everywhere. Why do I need a backup? And, we talked through some of those reasons why. We're going to talk a lot more about it, and Mike's going to mention it even some more in his presentation. But there are just a lot of cases where a replication of data does not constitute a backup. Having a second copy that's in sync, essentially, with the first copy is not valuable. And, user deleted data is a good example of that. But yeah, it's certainly not Microsoft's doing everything for you and retaining your data indefinitely. Like that is, there are a lot of restrictions as to what that looks like, both on deletion and on the storage of data itself, due to account quotas and everything you can think of. And then we do see a lot, actually, a lot because of the cost associated with extra storage. We do see a lot of organizations really ratcheting in their retention periods because the data isn't stored indefinitely for free. Yeah, so I think that these are all right on point in terms of what Microsoft Office 365 can and can't do, and specifically most of this email-oriented side of things. This is straight from Microsoft's services agreement, right? For Office 365. You have to be very clear with your management teams, or if you're the owner of these companies on the line here today, that Microsoft is holding themselves contractually not liable for any type of loss that you may sustain, right? Due to any error on their side, whether that is their issue, some type of an attacker, anything, they're not responsible. And they lay this out very clearly. In fact, they have a whole website dedicated to laying out the responsibility of the end user and the responsibility from Microsoft. And if you look at these, our marketing team very graciously summarized them. There's not a lot that they're actually responsible for. Most of it's just infrastructure oriented, being available. They do have some limited data loss recovery like things in their plan, but it's not indefinite, right? And even if they were to lose the data, the way that they write their contracts is pretty clear that they're going to fight you essentially on any type of liability due to the lost data. And so what is it that create from your responsibilities perspective is you still have to do everything yourself. You can use their tools, you can try to make it easy for yourself. We're going to talk a lot about how you can do that today. But you're responsible for security, you're responsible for backups, you're responsible for user and access control. Yeah, I think that this is looking at the slide, screenshot it, post it somewhere, make sure that you understand what you have to accomplish for yourself. And so these are the things that we would recommend people do in terms of protecting their data in call it a user-oriented way. This is not the technical protections. Implementing that is kind of that last step on the fourth side there, but starts with people. Humans make the most mistakes, both on creating risk and or just bad bad work. Helping those users with things like enhanced passwords, multi-factor authentication, making sure that you enable all that stuff, and really protect the applications that have access to that your users are generating data inside of. Like, email is not the end all be all of collaboration. There's a ton of sensitive data in OneDrive and Teams. Office 365 is not just email anymore, right? And you have to learn to protect that stuff. And we're going to talk specifically about third-party backup as a service and how that can help you and your organization get to that state. And so when you look at the stuff that Mike's going to talk about really in depth here, there are so many reasons to look at Veeam Backup for Office 365. We believe, and I'll talk a little bit about it at the end, that consuming that as a SaaS or a managed service is a much better way, considering you outsourced it to a SaaS model already. The idea of taking all your data protection and bringing that in-house back as a managed or as an activity that you must manage, it seems a little bit counterproductive there, but it's certainly possible. We're going to talk about the managed backup side, but all the stuff that Mike's going to talk about here, you can buy as a license from Veeam and do it all yourself if you actually desire to do that. All right, Mike, it's your time, man. Take it away.
Perfect. Thank you very much, William. Really do appreciate it. Good morning and good afternoon, everybody. My name is Michael Dean, systems engineer here for Veeam, and I'll be kind of walking you through the Veeam side for Microsoft Office. And what I really want to make sure that we understand first is just kind of the playing field, right? So William really did a great job of making sure that we understand, staff training, making sure that we understand, there's all these different types of policies and different compliances around really the entire data set, and from infrastructure all the way down to your data, right? But the one thing we haven't touched on just yet is just how big Office 365 is just in general. So their user base just out there is 300+ million users. And this is going to be continuing to grow day in and day out. There's a lot of companies and more prospects coming on to Office 365, getting away from their legacy versions and coming more into the cloud, which we get to Teams, right? Teams is one of those other collaboration really exchanges where, there's a lot of communication done there, right? I can tell you for the last, I think 3 to 4 years, I've been using Microsoft Teams very, very heavily, from, just talking with my peers all the way with talking to customers and prospective customers, right? So this is something that also needs to be protected. Just here at Veeam, we have 210,000 different Veeam downloads just for our Office 365 server, with 8.5 million of those actually under paid contract, which is all cool and fine and dandy. But what I really want to show you here next is really the data transfer, right? what we're seeing in the day-to-day growth. Now, really what is kind of fascinating is the discussion around retention. It's really kind of went from keeping this low retention, trying to make sure that we're, cutting as much as we possibly can off to save the pennies at the end of the day, to really now saying, you know what, it makes more sense to have this data for longer amounts of time for regulatory needs, right? I can tell you from experience, when a penalty happens from an auditor or HIPAA or DOD or DOJ or FIA, right? And you don't have these particular records in your repository, I can tell you from experience, they come with a lot of zeros, and it is more than usually the case of just paying for the storage array and the data to sit there anyway. And you can kind of see this by the chart here. You can see, from the first three, they're kind of the normal, and then you see that uptick of keeping that data for 7 years, 10 years, forever. And that really comes around compliancy, right? There's a lot of compliancy with different types of fields and different verticals out there, but more importantly, it's these regulatory needs and appliances that have to be met to make sure that we do that. So that's one of the biggest things I want to just kind of put out there. Is how the world has been shifting from, hey, short-term retention, and I kind of call short-term retention up to 5 years because that's very typical, and now we're starting to move into that longer-term retention. Now, I actually, on my next slide here, and William did a great job earlier about kind of talking about, the high levels of, this perception of what customers think they have. And this here on the screen, what we see here today is most of the time what most people think. Hey, if I'm with Office 365, that's infrastructure and that's the data, right? So they're making sure, the physical servers are maintenance, they're making sure the logical security is there, and that my data is also protected. But is that really true? And we learned from William that is honestly not the case. And this is really what it looks like more, right? It's, hey, Microsoft has a form and fashion of saying this is the infrastructure that we hold, and at the end of the day, and this is going to be apparent across all kind of apps and SaaS and things like that, your data is your responsibility. At the end of the day, it's yours, right? It's your emails, it's your Teams Exchange, it's your SharePoint site. Yes, Microsoft Office 365 wants to make sure it's there, but they want to make sure that the infrastructure is there. And that's kind of the meat and potatoes. And what I really want to show you here on our next slide is really the intricacies around what that really looks like, right? What does Microsoft guarantee? What can they do? And what can we do? And honestly, this is a really good thing to just take a screenshot of, making sure that, your admin team, your sysadmin team understands this wholeheartedly is going to be very, very apparent for long-term growth, and making sure you aren't missing anything, because that's really the biggest thing here. Now, what is Microsoft making sure they do? Again, uptime of the servers. They need to make sure that's happening. They need to make sure that the physical security, nobody can just walk into like a Microsoft data center and just plug in a USB drive and install ransomware. So, that physical layer, that logical security as well, even all the way down to app level, right? So that way you can connect to these particular repositories, uptime, geo-redundancy, all those good things, that the reason that we go to Microsoft Office 365. This is where most of the people just think, and they never read the rest of the screen, to be brutally honest with you. They say, hey, that sounds like that's all Microsoft Office 365's responsibility. But that's not true, unfortunately. So right here is your responsibility. It's your data. So accessing of your data. And even blatantly, they put it out there, just like William showed you earlier. They even tell you, hey, make sure that you have data retention of your backup data. Make sure you have 321. Make sure that your resistance to ransomware and malware and hackers and rogue apps, but more importantly, even internal stuff. Accidental deletions, all the way down to evidence tampering. This happens more and more from the inside level. So a lot of people always just think, hey, we always have to protect against ransomware, malware, hackers. Yes, and that's absolutely true. But a lot of the times, a lot of these incidents and some of the really bad stuff happens from the inside out. So making sure that you have a backup is huge there. So just that's one of the biggest things I really want to drive home here is whether it's internal or external, make sure you're protected. Cool. So here on our next thing is going to be, what are we actually going to want to protect from our shared responsibility model, right? Without your backup of Office 365, what do you have? Well, there's a couple things that is definitely going to hurt if you don't have it, right? So that first one's going to be, limited access and control of your own data, right? You want to make sure that at any point in time, you need to roll back to Sally's HR information. You need to roll back to DevOps. Having that kind of control is huge. Regulatory exposure. We talked about this a little earlier, right? If you have certain regulatory compliances, HIPAA, DOD, DOJ, FIA, right? These are huge, huge markets that you've got to make sure that you're hitting your certain particular required components to make sure that you are, in the green and not going to be, having an auditor and having, a massive bill come your way. Security vulnerabilities. This is something that, unfortunately, it's out there everywhere. Third-party apps, things like that, they're just out there, making sure that you have that. And I think this last one, to be brutally honest, is probably one of the bigger ones, is confusion and gaps in policies where you thought you were protected, again, kind of under that shared responsibility model, but unfortunately not. And here on my next slide, what I really want to show you is the 7 reasons why we should actually back up Microsoft Office 365, right? We kind of already talked about accidental deletions, right? That happens every single day. I used to be an MSP admin before I came to Veeam, and I can tell you the amount of accidental deletions, it's far outweighs a lot of this other stuff. And honestly, it's just little mistakes, right? Where you might have deleted an email and then 3, 6 months, 9 months down the road, you're like, I can't find it, and that had all my proprietary information. Well, if you don't have a backup and it's outside of Office 365 particular spec, unfortunately that data's gone forever. This other one is retention policy and confusion gaps. I kind of brought it up a little bit earlier here on our last slide, but I think this is really, really important. The amount of times that I've ever went into an Office 365 server and, the admin thought they were in an absolute, they thought they were secure from end to end. And then, they might have retention overlapping, or there's just, they thought something was actually checked, and unfortunately it wasn't. It happens a lot more than you think. Internal security threats, I already kind of talked about this a little bit earlier as well. But again, these internal security threats from insiders departing employees, these happen a lot. And unfortunately, a lot of that stuff is the evidence tampering. Hey, I'm getting fired on Friday, so I'm going to delete all my emails, so it's going to make it that much more worse. And that happens so often. External security threats, I think we're all used to this by now. Ransomware, rogueware, malware, the whole 9, right? This is something, unfortunately, it's not going to be going away anytime soon, right? It is what it is. This is the environment that we live in. And if anything, these are just going to be getting more sophisticated and more coming at us at 1,000 beats per minute. And again, legality, we always know that we have to meet these particular sectors and ransom and retention for HIPAA and DOD and DOJ. And the other cool thing I do want to mention is whether you're on premise with Veeam backup and replication for Office 365, or you're hybrid, or you're a little mix of both, we can actually help you protect the local and protect the object storage one as well. And then if you want to do migrations from your on-premise Exchange server to your Office 365 server, Veeam can also help you with that. And again, the last one that I really want to touch on is just team structure. Again, just how more important that is, being with, collaborating with teams and just talking with your internal team. It's just gaining more and more traction. Here on our next slide, what I really want to show is just some of these risks, right? I'm not going to go over all these. I know we've really talked about most of them, but I just want to show you how often these things are actually happening, right? Accidental deletion, 58%. That's more than half, right? Internal policy deletion, 38%. You're seeing a lot of this stuff that is just becoming more and more prevalent. Malicious users, again, more and more prevalent. This is, and unfortunately, it's one of these trending up things that, as an admin, I really don't like to see, but unfortunately, we just have to be ready for that particular type of vector and that particular type of user. So that way, the organization is going to be okay, and that we can recover in a timely fashion and make sure that we have the data that we need to have. So really kind of talking about retention policies, this is going to be on our next slide. So I kind of want to show you what it looks like from the Office 365 side of retention policy and what we actually get with them. Now, our inbox folder data, that is going to be the longest one that is in with Office 365. That's at 2 years. Everything outside of that, it's roughly about a month. So if you delete anything, guess what happens after a month? It is gone. Same thing with OneDrive, SharePoint, Teams. If it is in that particular file folder and it has been moved or set to archive or deleted, you don't have very much time before it's just permanently deleted and gone forever. And the big thing is making sure that we have these particular backups, because unfortunately here on our next slide, you're going to see right around the 140-day mark is when we start to see the unfortunate likelihood of figuring out that we had a data compromise, right? And this is unfortunate, but it happens more and more often. And again, it takes a long time to figure out that, hey, that email from January was actually something that I absolutely needed to keep, and now it's July. Guess what? It is completely gone if you do not have a backup. Now, compare that to actually protecting yourself with Veeam, on the other hand, which is going to be here on our next slide. You're going to see that it doesn't matter where you are in this particular the schema here. Whether you're at 1 year, 5 years, or 10 years, Veeam's going to be able to protect you. So, and what I want to show you here on our next slide is exactly that, what it looks like to do the difference between, hey, what does Office give you and what does Veeam give you, right? It doesn't matter if you want to keep your data for 1 week or 5 years or forever, right? We're going to be able to fill those simple gaps and making sure that we have a very simple and easy UI to make sure that there isn't any confusion, that there isn't anything going on, that we have everything that we need to have in the back of our backpack, quote unquote, to be able to come back on-prem. And I think this is something that William touched on a little bit earlier. Is, yes, what if Office 365 goes down? Yeah, it's probably not going to be, pushed back to an on-premise server just because of, how much work that does, and realistically, how often does Microsoft Office 365 go down? Now, I do want to get on some cool stuff. So on our next slide here, I do want to talk a little bit about our new self-restore portal. This is going to be cool stuff. So I do really want to kind of leave some time for this. So why self-restore portals, right? Or restores, as I really should say. This is something that is going to help everybody, from time savings to, enhanced security. All that is great. But I really love the time savings of it, to be honest, because when you have somebody that used to be an MSP admin, you can give them a self-service restore portal and allow those particular end users to be able to be kind of power users and enable themselves to do their own types of restores for, OneDrive, Teams, Exchange. This is huge. Not only do we also get add in now MFA to make sure that, these users are verified and everything is, taken care of from the security front, this also just helps, the overall business longevity, because you're not pushing and pulling on so many people to get the same type of outcome. And that really comes to scalability, right? So the bigger the portals, the bigger user base you have, the more claw you're going to have if they all need a restore at one particular time. So this is really going to help to automate that particular side. Now, what is new about the self-restore portal? And I'm going to show you a little bit more on our next page, which this is going to provide, honestly, just a central location for everybody to do their types of resource. Now, a lot of questions will usually come up is, hey, if I'm X, Y, and Z user, can I see Sally or Frank or Dev from DevOps? No, you can't. You can see yourself. That's it. So you're only going to have access to yourself to restore your particular side of data, whatever that may be. So it really just gives the users the availability and the power back to not only just create a help desk ticket, but to kind of alleviate that particular necessarily drag from, a whole bunch of people doing this, to just being able to say, hey, there is other things, obviously, inside of the organization that have to get done, and the IT organization has to do it. Gives them a little bit more flexibility to do that than just doing simple resource, which now we can absolutely do from the self-restore portal. Now, what I really want to show here on my next slide is a ton of recovery options. We have 45 different recovery options with Veeam. And something I want to note is this is going to be getting more and more and more types of resource. I can tell you from over the years here being at Veeam, this number has absolutely jumped up. So we have a very specific, we call them explorers. These explorers are basically how we get our data back. So we have specific explorers for SharePoint, OneDrive, Exchange, Microsoft Teams, right? And you can see inside of here how granular we can really get, right? There's not a lot of particular, you're not going to get this from Office 365. I can tell you that. I can guarantee that, right? There's from the admin level, there's a couple of these that just make my heart shine, right? Exporting a mailbox as a PST. This takes a lot of time inside of the Office 365 world. Yes, it's a point and a click and a shoot, but when you can do it from Veeam, it just makes things so much more easy. The other cool thing I want to really mention is our new low-cost backup copy job. So a lot of people here on our next slide, I really want to talk about the new backup copy job portion, which is really going to be the cost-saving portion, right? Most people have been asking for this for years and years and years and years. And the reason that they've been doing this, and I honestly, one of the biggest things for me that makes me so happy and why I love backup copy jobs, I sound like a nerd, it's because I am at heart, is 3-2-1. 3-2-1, for you guys that don't know, this isn't something that phoenixNAP and Veeam came up with. This is a universal rule for all backups. And this is just something, and I'll kind of break it down here, but it's making sure that we have long-term data archival and making sure that if things start to really hit the fan, we have different copies in different places. So let me kind of break that down really quickly for you. So 3-2-1. So 3-2-1 is breaking down into 3 different copies of your data, 2 of those on 2 different forms of media. Media being, maybe SSD and NVMe or tape or object storage, and that 1 really meaning offsite. And we really couldn't do this before without backup copy job being enabled, just because of the limitations of the server. Now with this being enabled, we can absolutely meet this particular side and have that secondary copy at a long-term archival with phoenixNAP, right? Now, data separation. This is something that I kind of talked a little bit about earlier. Everybody is going to be separated, geo-separated, and redundantly separated from all the different retention periods. So you can keep, so let's just say maybe the CEO, the CTIO, the CFO, you want to have maybe different retentions on their mailbox, all the C-class employees, right? Because it's more high transactional. They go through a lot more emails a day, and they probably have a lot more sensitive data, right? Than like somebody, let's say, that's just doing like janitorial stuff. So making sure that we have different retention policies and data separation is huge. And last but not least, the biggest one for most companies is saving the money, right? And how do we do that? We put in low-cost object storage. All right, so one last thing that I want to talk about of object storage here, and it's going to be on one of our last slides, is the new version 6 feature that's going to be able to be pushed into like Glacier and Archive Deep and Azure Archive. This is just making sure that we can even push it farther and deeper into the particular repositories that we had before. So this is going to be able to do, copy to object storage, offering long-term object retention, right? That's really the name of the game here. And then obviously we can of course push that to object storage, or phoenixNAP for your lock-in. I only had one last slide, and honestly my board some of you guys, it's more technical, just kind of showing the overlay of what it kind of looks like from that perspective of breaking down what is actually protected, where it can be stored, going into the copy side of it, and all the way to the recovery. So I do feel like I was still able to deliver you guys a lot of this good information that, unfortunately is one less slide, but that's okay. I hope you guys got a lot of good information from it. And once we get this back up and running, oh, here it is now. So, and this is exactly what I was just kind of talking to. So how the storage is there, we have copy jobs, and then at the very end, we have recovery. So if everybody's back up and running and everybody's comfortable, I'm going to pass it back over to one of our Platinum BCSP partners, William, and he's going to kind of take it from here.
All right, everybody. Let's go to the next slide, Boyana, for me. Perfect. Yeah, and so ultimately, phoenixNAP and Veeam have been working together since 2013, right? We've done so many awesome things together. We have a ton of services, but really the fastest growing service in our portfolio because of the reasons that we talked about today in terms of why you need this for your organization is this managed Office 365 backup experience. And we're actually able to help customers for a flat monthly per user fee, just like you're paying for the SaaS service itself. No extra storage fees, no nothing, just per user. We will take care of storing that data offsite, that 3-2-1 rule that Michael was talking about. We'll take care of managing the software. We'll give you some self-service restoration options so that we're not in the way of your operational engagement with your users. And ultimately, it's pretty hands-off for you, right? You work with us to get the right account credentials, to get the backup job started, and then you just get to consume it kind of as a SaaS service. And now with the release of Self-Service Portal, which we're super excited about, you can have that kind of SaaS experience, true SaaS experience, but provided by PNAP. So it's really, 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 really good value, I think, for everything. And like I said, certainly the fastest growing Veeam backup product that we have in our portfolio. Next slide, Boyan. And this, like I said, this wraps into a ton of other solutions that we have. We're using Veeam everywhere across our entire fleet of services. You know, if you need offsite backup for your VMs, if you need like replication and failover capabilities, we have specific services for that. If you are in your own data center today, in a VMware environment, and you're looking to consume or host those VMs elsewhere, we have our data security cloud, which gives you this all-inclusive approach that includes backups from Veeam, where you can just park those VMs, manage your applications, never have to worry about infrastructure again, and get your data protection, compliance, and security kind of handled for you. So a lot of cool stuff to unpack behind the scenes there. If you click, yes, I want to talk to PNAP at the end of this call, we'll absolutely go through any of those that you want to talk about. Next. There it is. So Boyan, if you'll pop that poll up, we can let everybody select what they would like to do. You have the opportunity just to hear from Veeam, to hear from PNAP, or if you don't, if you want to hear from both of us, you just tell the one you choose, and we'll handle that. If you don't want to be contacted right now, we will absolutely honor that as well. You'll probably still get invited to our webinars and things like that, but we're not going to contact you directly post to this meeting and try to raise any specific conversations. All right, perfect, and just move on to the next one. I think we're going to go to Q&A, and just like that, let's take a look at the questions that we had while we were going through this. Give me 1 second. I'm going to have to do it on my phone, so we'll find the right one here. But Yana, if you want to start off the first one, I know you have easier access to it than I did. Do you want to add the first question in there?
Give me a second. I'll read it to you. So our first question was related to, I believe, Microsoft Teams backup. So no, actually, can I set which data to back up based on how old or new it is? I think you talked about it, but this is a good question to elaborate on.
Yeah, I mean, Mike, do you want to field that one in terms of like retention policies and like how you configure those backup, well, how we would configure those backup jobs for you, but some of the technical details?
Yeah, absolutely. So there's two major ways to do how old they are and based on backup age. So there's item level retention and snapshot based retention. So item level retention is going to be, hey, let's just say you have an email that's 5 years old and your retention is, let's say, 6 years old, or if you want to keep it for 6 years. We're going to keep that data for 6 years, but after it reaches its retention level, it's going to be, pardoned off of that particular that backup because it doesn't meet retention. And that's going to be very granular, and it's very specific on the type of or how long that particular data has been alive, right? So we're going back to exactly when it was created. And then the snapshot is basically, hey, I want to keep this data for 6 years. We're going to take a snapshot of it, and that's how long we're going to keep it. And then after 6 years, we can revisit that and kind of go from there. But there is two major ways and two major differences when looking at retention, especially speaking from the Veeam Office 365 side.
Thank you, Michael. I think the next one is also more directed to you. So basically, how do you back up Microsoft Teams? Again, you talked about it specifically, but not really Teams. Can you explain that?
Sure, absolutely. So how are we back, and this is going to be kind of the same for the entire data set for Exchange, OneDrive, SharePoint, and Teams. So what do? We actually do this on a per user basis. And that's really the key here, where we're looking at a user or from a user basis up. So whether that's SharePoint, OneDrive, Teams, Exchange, we're actually connecting to the data store on the back end of Microsoft to actually pull that data down, regardless of what that data actually be. So if it's OneDrive, SharePoint, Teams, or Exchange, that's how we're all going to be doing it. So we have to connect to the data store on the back end, and how we do that is via APIs and our main brain server, which is going to be Office 365.
Thank you for that. And the last one, I think, is more for William. How long can phoenixNAP keep the data for?
Yeah, that's completely customizable. So one of the things I mentioned, we've got this kind of flat per user pricing model that we include. And the best part about that is, we're continuing to archive out that, or to continue to keep that data indefinitely. So I think we contractually limit ourselves in some ways, but there's no limit on how much data that we're taking in on a per user basis. The only time that there's ever any questions is we do have some internal business rules around lopsided data. So if you have 1 petabyte of OneDrive data and 5 users, that's not going to work, right? We'd have to have a different business model for that account. But just our average everyday run-of-the-mill, when we're engaging with you, we'll have you run some reports from Office 365, and we'll be able to say, hey, look, okay, this falls in our parameters of normalcy, and then with that, it's a flat fee per user per month, and then that's just as much data as you have for that user. So it's actually a pretty attractive and very cost effective way to get that data protection included. And frankly, it's very much in line with the way that that you're consuming Office 365 today, right? You're just paying the meter every month for the number of users that you have, and it works the exact same way with us.
Thank you, William. I think these are all the questions for today.
Awesome. Okay. Well, I want to personally thank everyone again. I am so sorry that my computer went crashing on everybody. But taking your time to come here means a lot to us. I know that we certainly wish we were doing more in-person stuff. We're getting back out there. If anybody's going to be at VMware Explore coming up, please reach out. And maybe we can set up some time to have a more in-depth chat there. And other than that, I think we'll end it here. Thank you, everyone, and have a great day.